Hi, I'm happy to welcome you back to my channel. In the previous video, we were talking about our for loop. So we are still discussing our looping statements. And we have from line 4 to line 9. This is actually a continuation video for the looping statement. I remember that in the previous video, we discussed at length on line 4, which is our for loops. In this continuation video, we're just going to be kicking off from where we stopped, and we are going to be taking up our line 5, which is our for in loop. So what I'm just going to do is that I'm going to push this guy down. Actually, if this is the first video you are watching, you should try and just go over the previous videos. I mean, this current video is continuation of chapter 3b. You should just take out your time to go over the previous video so that you can be able to catch up with what we are doing. So I've pushed this guy down. Before we go into our for in loop, there's something I want us to just take a look at. I mean, I probably should have included it in the previous video, but since we are here already, let's just talk about it now. Somewhere in the previous video, we did something like this: int my cool number equal to 10, right? And then we talked about the increment operator, in which we could do my cool number plus plus. So if I decide to print out my cool number, right, print my cool number, I'm just going to click on run, and I am expecting that my cool number should be what, 11, since I am incrementing it here. And we said that what the increment operator does is that it first adds 1 and then it overwrites the initial value with the result. So I'm just going to click on run, and I'm expecting to see 11 on the console. So we have 11 here. As you can see that on line 7, my cool number is incrementing by 1. So what if I want to increment by 2? I mean, what if I want to increment by 10? What if I want to increment by 100, right? There is still a short syntax for it in that. I'm going to comment this one. So let's say we want to increment my cool number by 5 and overwrite the initial value with the result. So what I'm going to say is my cool number plus equal to 5. And if I print out my cool number, it is supposed to give me 15. So let me click on run, and I have 15. So what if I want to increment by 98? I'll just say 98. So this is actually what I wanted to show you, right? It was supposed to be part of the previous video we did, but due to one thing or the other, we couldn't add it. And the thing is that you can still use it for both the increment and the decrement operator. So let's say my cool number is what, 100. You know, if I do cool number minus minus, I'm supposed to be getting 99, right? So however, if I want to reduce 100 by 15, I could just say my cool number minus equal to, and it should give me 85. So let me just click on run, and I'm expecting to see 85 on the console. Yeah, so we have 85 over here, right? So having said that, I'm just going to delete these guys so that we could proceed to talk about our for in loop. Talking about our for in loop, a for in loop is basically used in collections. Let's just take a brief overview of what collections are. So collections in that is a way of storing and managing grouped items. Just as the name indicates or the name suggests, collections, right? A collections of objects. These objects can be the same objects. These objects can be different objects. We are just going to give few examples of collections. I'm still going to put up a separate chapter, particularly for the collections in that, during which we are going to talk about collections in detail. This is just an overview to enable us discuss our for in loop and our map method and our for each method, because they are basically used on collections. The first example of a collection could be a list. So let's say I want to have a list of numbers. So I could say final numbers is equal to a list, and to indicate a list, I put up my square brackets, right? I put up my semicolon, and inside this square bracket, I can say 2, I can say 10, I can say 3, I can say 15. Numbers is now a collection of integers. I can also decide to say minus 12.5. But this time around, numbers is now containing both integers and decimals. So we can say it's a collection of real numbers. Let me remove this guy. I could decide to have names of people stored inside a list. I could say final names is equal to a list, and then I'll just put up my semicolon here, and inside this square bracket I could just say Emmanuel, Joseph, Daniel. So let me use a single quote here, Daniel. On line 6 I have a collection of numbers, and on line 7 I have a collection of strings. However, the collection we are using here is list. I could have said final, let's say number numbers or set of numbers. So whenever you want to indicate set, you use curly braces or curly bracket. I could say 3, 12, 24. One thing about a set is that you can never repeat items. Since I've already said 3 here, if I decide to put 3 again, there should be an issue, right? So if I hover on this, it says two elements in a set literal shouldn't be equal. So for a set, I should not repeat items. But here, I could still put 3 and everything is fine for a list. So if you want to store elements in such a way that none of the elements should be repeated, you are going to use a set. So apart from list and set, I can also have a map. A map is a collection of key value pairs. Inside the map, you store items, but then for each item you store, you have to identify that item with a key. And whenever you want to access that item, you use the key. For instance, I can say final map of names and age. When we want to write our map, we still use curly bracket. So since we have a map of names and age, so we could say Emmanuel and then we put a colon. This string of Emmanuel is our key. And then we put up a value. Let's say Emmanuel is 20. The second one is Joseph. And then Joseph is what? 100. So I'm just going to put a semicolon to indicate the end of this statement. So this is an example of a map, this is an example of a set, and this is an example of a list. These are the major three that you are more likely to be using all the time in that. So there are more examples, and I'm just going to list them for you as a take-home assignment or as something you could do at your leisure time. You could just read up about them online. So we have the one we call a queue. I'm just going to put them inside comment. QUEUE. We also have record. We also have linked list, and then the last one is going to be iterable. Yeah, I think we have iterable. Iterable comes from the word iterate. That means any collection you can iterate on. And you know the meaning of iteration, right? It has to do with going over something over and over and over again. So you could just check up the rest of these collections on line 16 at your convenient time. It should be your assignment. Currently, we are not actually indicating the data types of these values. What I could just do here is I could remove this fine now, and on line 7, what we have is a list of integers, right? And the way to indicate their data type is either you say list of int, or you just use your final keyword here, just as we did before, and then come here inside here and then put what your int. For this line 8, the same thing we did on line 7, we could do it, but this time around we use string. So we could just still come here and put our string. So for this one as well, we could just put here our what? Int. And for this one, this is a map of names and age. And you can see that our keys are what? Strings, and our values are what? Integers. So here we could just say string, comma, int, and everything is fine. We might still want to remove this guy. We use the keyword map with a capital M, and then inside the map we denote our key, which is a string, and then our value is what? An integer. For this one, we could just say set of integer. That's that about including the data types. Well, just like we said in either chapter 2 or chapter 3, that is so brilliant enough that even if you did not indicate the data type, it is going to be able to infer that data type. So I'm just going to go back and have all of those guys started with find out. So that's that about your collections. So we could say that a for-in loop is a special or particular case of a for loop. This special case, I mean, they are just reserved for collections. You just want to go over collections and grab every element in that collection. And for that element, you want to do something with it, right? The syntax for a for-in loop is very simple. First of all, we start with the keyword for. So I'm just going to say for. We put up our bracket, then we put up our curly braces. Now we want to sit back. I mean, look at the collection that we want to iterate over. Looking at line 8, we see that this collection holds a list of names, and those names are strings. So actually, line 8 is a list of strings. Line 7 holds integers, and you could as well say that numbers is a list of int. So if you want to loop through names, what we could do is to say for string. Now, for every item in that collection, what do we want to call it? Because whenever we loop through, for every round, that is going to give us the item for that particular round. For instance, on line 8, we have 3 items. So in round 1, that is going to give us Emmanuel. In round 2, that is going to give us Joseph. In round 3, that is going to give us Daniel. So for each of these rounds, how do we want to take the item for that particular round? And we know that all of them are string. That is why we are starting with a string as data type. Let's call each one name. So we could say for name, and then we use the in keyword. In is a keyword in that. Whenever that sees in, it says, okay, in, is it an iterable? Is it a collection? Let's say in names. And then if I hover on this name, it says the value of the local variable name is into use. What are we going to do with name? For now, let's just print it out. Inside this block, I'll say print. So I'll print out name. So if I run this code, it's just going to give me Emmanuel, Joseph, and Daniel. Let me just click on run. So we have Emmanuel, Joseph, and Daniel. So the same thing, we could loop through line 7. We could loop through numbers. So what I'm just going to do is that instead of names, I'm going to convert it to numbers. So there is an issue. If I hover on this guy, it says the type list of int used in the for loop must implement iterable with a type argument that can be assigned to a string. So what I'm saying here is that for string name in numbers, but then name is going to contain each of these items in this collection, right? But then they are not string, they are integers. So I have to change this string to int so that everything will be fine. So one other thing I could do is to say var. In this way, that knows that okay, the name is going to be a variable. So we could still print out name, right? And it's going to give us 2, 10, 3, 15. But then this is not the cool way. Since you already know that this guy is a list of integers, you could make things easier for that by saying int. So we have final names, right? But what if I decide to put 25 here and then put a comma? Let's use names this time around instead of numbers. So we run into an issue, which was the same thing we saw the previous time. So the idea now is that names is no longer containing a list of strings. Name is containing a list of strings and integers. So we could say that it contains a list of dynamic because the items do change. So what we are supposed to do here, since we know that the data type of this name variable is going to change in the future, so we could just say var, and then we could as well change this guy. Instead of saying name, we can say I. For var I in names, we want to print I. And when I click on run, it just prints out everything on line 8. So that's that about our for in loop. So now let's go over to the while loop. I'm just going to clean this. We bring this guy up. So let's push this guy down so that we have our while loop to talk about. So talking about our while loop. So the difference between a while loop and an if statement is that for an if statement, the execution is once. But then for a while loop, the execution is what? Continuous. For instance, I say final number, let's say is equal to 10, right? So when I write an if statement, I could say if number equal 10, I want to do something. So let me just print out number is 10. And when I click on run, during execution, it checks, is number equal to 10? Yes, because on line 8, we're already assigning 10 to number, right? It goes ahead to execute this block. However, for a while loop, just that we remove the if keyword and replace it with a while keyword. So while number equal to 10, print number is 10. Well, if I click on run now, it's going to lead us into an infinite loop. The reason is because the while keyword inside its implementation, it acts as a for loop. Just that the only thing it is looking at is just this condition. So it goes for round 1, it prints out number is 10. So it just keeps checking. As long as this condition is true, it is going to continue executing this block and it is not going to stop. The way it is configured right now, it is going to continue executing it because number will continue to be 10. Since we do not have any way of maybe modifying number at runtime so that the value is going to change, and maybe when the value changes, number is no longer equal to 10 and then the loop will stop. As it stands now, it's going to run into an infinite loop. I'm not going to run this code because we always want to avoid infinite loops, right? One thing we could do is to find a way to control this while loop and find a way to modify this number at runtime. One of the ways we could achieve that is this. Instead of saying number equal to 10, I could say as long as number is less than 20, I want to continue executing line 11. We still have an infinite loop because 10 will always be less than 20. It's still going to keep executing this line. However, if we say number plus plus, after every execution, it is going to increment and rewrite number. We cannot modify this number because it is final. So one thing we could do is to remove this final and then put an in, and everything should be fine. So in this way now, we have control over this condition because it is only through this condition that we could control our while loop. So I'm just going to click on run. So you can see number is 10. So what I'm going to do is on line 11, instead of saying number is 10, let's rewrite this. Just like what we have learned before, we learned about string embedding, right? Which is interpolation. I'm just going to say $number is less than 20 and I'll click on run. So we can see 10 is less than 20, 11 is less than 20, 12 is less than 20, 13 is less than 20. And I think this happens 10 times. First of all, it starts, number is 10. The first check is 10 less than 20? 20. Yes, 10 is less than 20. Then it prints 10 is less than 20, which is this first line. After executing this block, it increments and reassign on line 12. When you do number plus plus, number is now 11. Now it goes back to this condition and checks, is 11, is it less than 20? Yes, 11 is less than 20. It comes down and then it prints this. It continues like that till this particular last line when number is 19. So when number is 19, it does number plus plus, and 19 plus 1 is 20. Now when it now checks, is 20 less than 20? It is false. So it is not going to execute this code again. That's that about a while loop. Let's see if we can modify this code to be able to use our decrement operator. Instead of saying less than 20 here, I would say as long as number is greater than 0, we want to print out number is greater than 0. So let's just say number is greater than 0. Now we want this guy to be decreasing. We decrement, right? We decrement number. If I run this code, let's see what it gives us. So we can see that 10 is greater than 0 and up to 1 is greater than 0. Well, we can do something like this: minus equal to 2. So that means we want to decrement by 2. And if I run this code, it will decrement 10 by 2. You see, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. For the other one we did, we can increment by 2. I'm just going to go back and say plus equal to 2. And I click on run. You see 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and all. So that's that about our while loop. So we are just going to go over the next one, which is our do while loop. And what I'm just going to do is that I'm going to remove this code. I'm going to remove this space as well, and I'm going to come into this place so that we get to talk about this guy.